What's going on, Warriors, and welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Movement Podcast, Voice for the Voiceless. I am your host, Chris. Thank you guys so much for being patient with me over these last couple weeks. I know it's been almost a month since my last episode came out, but we just did a men's mental health panel with NAMI, my good friend Sean here, who I'll introduce here in a second. Very good conversation. We ran about 2 hours. As soon as I have that recording, it will be on this podcast. So thank you guys again for your support. Always appreciate everything you guys give to me, all the feedback, and my listeners. Today's special guest, he is also a fellow podcaster in the mental health community. He is a fellow warrior, and he is one of my good friends, Sean. Sean, how you doing today, man?
Good, man. Looks like we're hanging out on the island of relevancy.
I was hoping you were going to catch it. I'm like, damn, you didn't say anything yet. But thank you again so much for coming onto the podcast. Greatly appreciate your support as well.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I always love supporting my friends.
Yeah, man. So tell us a little about yourself, just for our viewers. Just introduce yourself.
All right. So my name is Sean Young. I'm a person in long-term recovery. What that looks like for me. So I haven't put a body in my system. Wow. Wow, that's insane. That's the first time I've ever said that.
Already off to a great start.
Already off to a great start. We're fucking playing games here. Anyways, I haven't put a mind-altering substance in my body since December 7th, 2019. And that is my day that I recognize as being sober, even though my recovery would not start for about a month after that. Being able to be sober and work my program has given me the ability to be a better father, better life partner to my significant other, as well as be a better friend and a better human being overall.
Thank you for that, man. So tell us about your journey and how you got to the path of healing that you're currently on.
Oh man, dude, my life has been filled with trauma, crazy trauma. A lot of stuff that I hit here and there, and I talk about here and there. A lot of childhood trauma that surrounded my father and I, and then some military service trauma, and then some post-service trauma. I like to look at this and just like say I have faced almost every form of trauma that you can think of. I've worked on it. It's been a journey. I got to this point where I sat in jail and I kind of blamed everybody for my problems, and I blamed everybody for the fact that I was an alcoholic. I blamed everybody for the fact that I had problems, and I wasn't ready to take accountability of it. And one of my cellmates, this old Native man, dude, and I'm telling you, when an old Native man tells you to shut the fuck up, you just gotta listen, right? You can't beat that. And he looked at me and he was like, Viking, shut the fuck up. Now, if you're listening to this, I got a massive beard, right? I look like a Viking. And so he said, Viking, shut the fuck up. You create all these problems in your life. When you accept that, you'll be okay. And so, like, at first I was like, man, who is this old ass man talking to me like that? But then I really sat with it. And I was like, he's actually right. Like, I've created a lot of these problems in my life as an adult. And now I have to take accountability and responsibility for them and either continue down this path I'm going or change my life completely. And that's what I did. I got out of jail and I hit the ground running, and no turning back.
I've always felt like the hardest part of anybody's healing journey is accountability. It's so hard to accept, like you said, the problems that you cause in your life. The easy go-to in today's society in general is just, the instant gratification, that point the fingers at other people and not wanting to look yourself in the mirror. And for me, while there was a lot of trauma in my life and a lot of that was caused by, family members, parents, whoever, all the things that I did to cope that were unhealthy was my doing. And while sure I can sit here and say it wasn't my fault, it was to an extent. And, again, like in your journey, you had all this trauma and things that you went through, and you clung to things that you thought were healthy, that you thought could just get you through the day. And just being able to look in the mirror and say that, you fucked up, this is because of you. You're in the position that you're in because you put yourself there. And I feel like a lot of people struggle to just identify what the actual problem is when it comes to just healing, because most people don't even want to put the work into healing.
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. I think there's a lot that comes with that too. It's the guilt and the shame, right? And looking at generational trauma and seeing the repeating patterns and saying, how can I break this? Like not knowing your next step, the fear of the unknown. That's a huge one. For me, the fear of the unknown has always crippled me, right? Because I didn't know what was coming next, with my stuff in Alaska when you and I, when I reached out to you, was a whole bunch of fear of the unknown. Not a damn clue of what I was going to do next, but I knew I had to do something. And the fact of the matter is a lot of us get hung up on this, on the semantics of things, right? We get hung up on the this is what happened and I can't let that go, or this is what I did and I can't let that go. Well, what's preventing you from letting it go, right? Like what are you holding on to that like it's your last dying breath that's going to prevent you from moving forward and stepping forward, even if you've done it or somebody's done it to you? Like, right? I used to hold on to everything everybody did to me, and I was like, this person meant to do that. 9 chances out of 10 they didn't. They just weren't paying attention. Or that's why road rage is such a big thing, is because they think people intentionally do that things. I mean, obviously there are assholes on the road, let's be real here.
Right.
But I mean, people don't pay attention, right? So sometimes they cut us off, or they don't go as fast as we want them to at that exact time. But we got to remember, like, we're doing the same damn thing to somebody behind us. And so that is what I look at, as I'm like, I don't know what kind of day this person's having. They can be having a great day and just be a shitty human being, or they could have this terrible day and be the best human being in the world. I don't know, but let's try and stray away from like persecuting that person and step in and work on what I can control. The only thing I can control is the way I handle things.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's like you control how you react, not how everybody else feels. Or I forgot what that exact quote is, but I feel like you kind of fall into that trap of toxic victimhood too. And that's a phrase I'm glad that the lovely word buzzwords that we talk about that have lost their meaning because so many people use it. I feel toxic victimhood isn't talked about enough because, like
Yeah.
you said, hanging on to something and hanging on what happened in your last relationship, what happened today, what happened last week, somebody cuts you off last month, and you're still holding on to that one thing, and you can't seem to find a way out of it, and you're like that rat on that wheel that just doesn't go anywhere else, or hamster, whatever.
Yeah. I know somebody. I know somebody that holds on to what their parents did to them when they were 16, and they're in their 50s now, and they refuse to let that go. Like they won't go to their parents' house. They won't talk to them. If they do, it's an argument, it's a fight. And it's like, your parents are entering the last stages of their life. Is this the last thing that you want your parents to remember you by? Is this how you want your relationship with your parents to go? Because here soon, they're not going to be around for you to say everything that's on your heart.
Right. And with the parent conversation, my mom is one of those people who hangs on to things for decades. And then the second you like, it happened 20 years ago, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, it doesn't matter. You don't feel the way that I do, and just refuses to heal. And when it comes down to just having narcissistic parents, or parent rather, it's really hard to look at them like a parent after all the trauma and everything that you endured.
Yeah.
Like I can forgive and forget everything that both my parents have done. Those scars are still there, and I know what conversations not to have with them. I know what to tell them, and what not to tell them. And at the end of the day, boundaries are something a lot of people don't appreciate either,
No.
especially when it comes to healing.
The boundaries are a buzzword, dude. Like a lot of people don't understand the concept of boundaries, and they think like completely like alienating somebody is a boundary, but really just being a dick, right?
Right.
Boundary is like, okay, this person does this, there's going to be a consequence after. Not it doesn't have to be a violent one. I mean, I think we a lot of men and women get hung up on this violence thing, like I gotta beat their ass in order to get respect now. One of my boundaries has always been, I'm going to show you respect, but when you disrespect me, you lose that respect, right? So the respect has to start somewhere. So if you disrespect me, you lose that respect, and you have to gain it back. But that's a human decency level, right? Like I'm gonna treat everybody the same way, but you step on my toes, and that respect goes out the window. But you were talking about toxic parents, dude. One of the things that my dad does that annoys the dog shit out of me, and I love him to death. Our relationship has gotten better, but he says, my parents, and I guess I can say it, that the person I was talking about before is my dad. But he references things that his parents have done to him, right? And I'm like, Dad, you've done the same to me, right? Like, how is that fair that you hold them to a greater standard than you hold yourself to?
Right.
Right. Like he's like, oh, since I've lived here, they have never once come over. And I'm like, well, one, they live an hour and a half away and they're in their 70s. Do you expect them to get in a car and drive an hour and a half? Or that's an unrealistic expectation too. Dad, you haven't even come to see me when I was an hour away from you. Like, come on. Let's be real here.
It's always a matter of what's the phrase? Do as I say, not as I do, kind of thing.
Yep.
And just they don't want to look at themselves in the mirror and realize that they're continuing that cycle that they're complaining about.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, yeah.
especially when it comes to parents, man, it's obviously there's no instruction manual on being a parent for anybody, but you should know, okay, this is how my parents brought me up and this is how I don't want to raise my kids, not just my parents did this and f them because they did all these things and they didn't walk me home one day or whatever it is, and they hold on to that for like 20 something years, and meanwhile, while they're refusing to heal, they do the same thing to you. And
I mean, look back 2 generations from us, right? And the parenting styles. So our grandparents raised their kids that were rebellious in a way of, well, we're going to either beat your ass or get rid of you, right? So then that creates trauma on those children, on our parents, right? And then so they're stepping out, they're trying to figure out who they are. Meanwhile, they're either engaging in drugs, alcohol, or both, risky sexual behaviors, all that shit. And then when we come along, they do almost the same thing to us, except for they say, I don't want to raise my kids the way I was raised. So instead of, perpetuating that, I'm just going to be their friend, or I'm going to alienate them so they don't have to feel that pain. But you're creating a whole new cycle of trauma to the next generation.
right.
And it's fucking insane.
Yeah, I've always felt like, the day that I have kids, like obviously I'm not going to repeat what my parents did. And, the first cycle I broke was being a young parent. I know that's might be like an roller to some people, and this isn't a knock at anybody who had kids young, but both of my parents were basically kids when they had me. My dad was, I think, 21. My mom just turned 18 when she had me, and it, you know, it wasn't perfect for them when they had me, and they had to struggle a lot, and they were growing up while they were trying to raise me, and I totally get that. But in the meantime, like you said, a whole generation of trauma introduced onto me, but turned up. If
Yeah.
they tried so hard to not be like their parents, they're worse than their parents. And it's crazy because they're obviously, we talk about this all the time. The mental health resources weren't there. We didn't know what depression was 50, 60 years ago. I mean, we did. It was in a book, and you would go to a psych ward if you said you had anxiety. Anxiety, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
You sound crazy. We're gonna put you in a straitjacket in a padded room. You know what I mean? Like, obviously there's reasons why our parents were the way that they were with us, but at the same time, there comes a time where when we're trying to heal, we gotta establish those boundaries so we're not repeating that cycle, not harping on everything that they did, but putting up those boundaries and I guess not isolating them, but keeping them far away enough where they're not going to continue that cycle on you. And that's hard for a lot of people. It was really hard for me.
Yeah, I would keep my dad at arm's length at all times up until probably 5 or 6 years ago. Because I didn't know what was going to come out of his mouth. I didn't know if it was going to be "I love you" or "I'm going to fucking kill myself." Right.
Right.
So like, and I've had plenty of those conversations with my dad
Mhm.
where I'm like, dude, you need to stop. I had to call the police on, to do a welfare check on him, dude, and it was just insane. But like, the thing is what what the parents of that generation don't see is that their inability to talk about their feelings and their emotions because they have to hold up to the stigma created our generation of, I'm just gonna say, a fuck ups, because we fuck up a lot, right? Um, and I'm in this generation, so I can say it. But then it also gave us that ability to wake up and say things aren't okay. Like,
Yeah.
this is not the way we were treated as children and the way we treated as young adults. It's not okay.
And so much of that behavior is normalized that when you finally start getting to the point of healing, it's like, oh shit, that wasn't normal. Like, being hit wasn't normal. Like, obviously there's discipline, but then there's like actual abuse.
Yeah.
And again, you just kind of realize what wasn't normal and what toxic cycles that it's up to you to break. There was a lot of that for me, and I'm sure for yourself as well.
Yeah. I actually was on a podcast a few days ago, and somebody asked me, one of the hosts, the co-host said, why, if you did or if you didn't, did you talk to an adult about what was going on? I was like, do you think that I trusted adults? I said, the foundations of trust are implemented to you as a child at 3, 4, 5 years old.
Right.
The instruction of trust. Hey, don't touch that stove. It's hot. I'm gonna fucking touch it anyways. That's the instrument of trust. And so my instrument of trust was broken. I didn't understand it. So like, how can I trust that an adult is going to have my best interest at mind or best interest at heart when no adult in my life has ever had my best interest at heart? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and for me, and I don't think I ever like talked about this out loud just because it wasn't really something that I felt like needed to be said. But since we're on the subject, I have a really bad flinching problem. Like, it doesn't matter if like somebody's raising their hand or something moves over here, like I flinch. And it's because of shit that I went through in my childhood. Shit was broken over my head, like constantly smacked in the back of the head, whatever. That was something that evolved into what it is now, and I can't help but to flinch if something moves weird or if I hear a weird noise, like whatever it is. And um that was my foundation of trust broken for me too. And talking to adults, man, talking to adults about my problems wasn't something I felt comfortable with probably for 27 years of my life.
Yeah.
And mainly because the last time I tried to talk to an adult, obviously before I was in therapy, I mean, um, is I was given away by my own mother to a family friend because she didn't want to deal with me anymore. Those are my mom's words after I attempted at my life.
Yeah.
She didn't want to deal with me anymore. And the outpatient therapist that I had was a complete joke. And or not the therapist directly, but just like the therapy in general was a joke. And I'll never forget that for as long as I live. And it's not like I'm not harping on it, but it's something that has made me passionate about the things that we talk about now. And we can openly talk about and say, hey, if you see a kid struggling, or if you know a teenager that's struggling and you're watching them struggle, don't just sit there and watch them. Like, let them know that there's help out there, that we have so many more resources available now than when you and I were kids.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, I last year, one of my soon-to-be ex-wives' coworkers ended up coming to stay with us because her dad beat the shit out of her.
Right.
And in order to alleviate a lot of the stress in her life, she came to stay with us. And like, you know, I sat and I had to watch this kid like just unfold all the time. And I was like, hey, look, dude, like I can drive you over to the hospital. We can talk to a counselor. I don't have to be there, you know, whatever, just somebody. And she just didn't, because she was so afraid that it would get back to her dad. And like, it's rough for kids, right? It's rough for us, but it's rough for kids in this generation. On top of that, like we're in the generation of technology. These kids don't know how to survive without a fucking phone or an iPad in their face. Let's be real. And it's harder for them. You know, I was listening to a podcast where this guy said that he went. I actually think it was one of my guests. He went and he did just this little survey study where he sat at a table at a college gathering, and they were handing out things. Not a single person came to that table, and as soon as they noticed that they would have to engage with the people at the table, they went like this, because they don't know how to handle stress or cope with stress, and so like, or the anxiety of having to talk to people, and that's healthy anxiety at times, right? Like, you know, I used to get really anxious when I started podcasting, because I was like, I don't want to sound like a jackass, right? But the reality is there's healthy and unhealthy, you know, anxiety, and I think that the generation now isn't equipped to have that, and it didn't help that COVID happened.
Yeah. COVID was definitely something I noticed myself. Definitely felt my brain going backwards in terms of socializing.
Yeah.
And before I get into my second question, because the last comment you made kind of segued into that, I just dare I say that technology is one of the biggest reasons why their suicide numbers are high. Like, you know, all these kids, like you said, they're born through iPads. They're on their phones constantly. They don't know how to communicate with each other. And then when they meet the real world, when they're forced to talk to people, kids are assholes. Like, let's call it what it is. Kids are assholes nowadays. And I'm sure we weren't any better when we were kids. I don't think we were this bad. And you know, I think it's a parenting thing too, because a lot of parents use technology as babysitters, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like you see these 14, 15-year-old kids take their life because they can't handle this shit. And it's because of technology. I mean, yeah, technology is great for the fact that we have information right now. We have all the resources literally in the palm of our hands. But turn that coin over, what do we have? Kids that have social anxiety, kids that don't know how to communicate with people. And then, you know, imagine the trauma that we had to endure put on today's kids. I mean, obviously, there's still that trauma going on, not what I'm saying, but like,
Yeah.
imagine some of the problems that we had to face that were normalized on some of these kids in today's world. Like, bullying when our parents were growing up, bullying when we were growing up was physical bullying.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously there's still plenty of that as well, but like now it's online bullying, and it's so much worse than it has ever been. Like, to me, I would rather get punched in the face by a bully than some of the things these kids say online, because my jaw drops at some of the comments that these people make to each other. Like,
Oh yeah.
I've talked about this in a previous podcast about my anger turning into trolling on Twitter and stuff, and you know, whatever. I pulled away from Twitter, but basically my family was being targeted. You know, I was, my personal information was getting blasted on Twitter and all that stuff, because people just don't know how to act humane towards each other. And it's crazy to me that in a world of awareness in a world of acceptance that we're just still so full of hate, even more now than ever. And
Mm.
like you said, the pandemic made that like 100 times worse.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
On top of that, like, it's not just about that. Like, people don't know when to stop, right? People don't have that break. They say that, we have to go balls to the wall and destroy somebody in order to get gratification. It's like, why? What are you doing for yourself that makes this situation make you feel good? It's
right.
bullshit.
Um, so based on your last comment about your podcast, I kind of want to segue into the second question I had for you. So when did you decide to start your podcast, and did you have a set goal when you created it, or was it just kind of like a spur of the moment kind of thing?
So when I first got into recovery, I wanted to start my podcast, but I didn't feel like I had enough time. Because like when you get in the rooms of AA, dude, like it's all about time. It really is. I don't know if you've been to a meeting or if you
Yeah,
know any. Okay, so it's all about time, right? Like how
right,
much time you have. And in some of the circles in AA, if you don't have an extended period of time, or if you have X amount of years, you don't talk. You just shut the fuck up and listen. And so that's how I felt about podcasting. I felt like I didn't have enough time under my belt, that people would take me as a joke. And so I really beat myself up. And it wasn't until about last year that I was like, I need to do something. And I was on TikTok, I was on live, I was cooking dinner, and this guy comes in and he's like, "Hey man, you got a nice beard." And I was like, "Well, thanks, dude." He's like, "You want to be a brand ambassador?" Him and I hit it off. We became real good friends, and he invited me on, one of his shows to do just like a panel. And we talked about spirituality and about paranormal shit. I love paranormal stuff. And afterwards, he's like, "Dude, you got a voice for podcasting. You can carry on a conversation. You're really personal or personable." I was like, "Thanks, man. But I just don't have the equipment." And he was like, "Do you have a microphone?" I was like, "Yeah, but it's not." He's like, "Use it." "Do you have headphones?" "Yes." "Use it." "Okay, I just don't have the software." "Here's the software I use. Go buy it." So I did. And then he was like, "Do you have a topic that you want to cover?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "Do it." So, at first it was kind of like, I just want to get my story out, and I don't know where this is going to go. And so I put my story out first. I believe in leading from the front. Like no matter what I do, I'm going to lead from the front. I'm going to do it before everybody else does, not as a selfish thing, but I'm going to set the example for others to follow.
right.
And so I started my podcast last year. It's actually been a year now. I'm excited about that.
Oh yeah,
Um,
congrats, man.
Thanks, brother. And so, like, I started asking people if they wanted to share their story, but I started asking people that I knew, right? So I was like, friends that I had that were in recovery, my mentors in recovery, my sponsors, just anybody I could get my hands on that would share their story, and I did it. And I didn't know what it would turn into, and it turned into something awesome. I was one of two recovery podcasters in all of Alaska. And it was crazy because when my podcast came out and I started putting episodes out, some of my mentors would come to me and they say, "Hey man, like we're around the city, like at these conventions, at these recovery meetings, people are asking about you." And I'm like, "Who are these people?" And they're like, "We don't know their names, but they're asking about you, about your podcast and how to listen to it." I'm like, "No way." Right. So like people I don't know want to listen to me and listen to other people share their stories. It's pretty awesome.
I remember when the pandemic first started. I think that was around the time, a little bit before the pandemic is when I created the group. And that before I created the group, it started with a post that just blew up. So I'm like, okay, maybe this could go somewhere. Created the group and just kind of let it build to what it is now. And I was tossing around the idea of a podcast. And I was just like, during the pandemic, I feel like everybody had a freaking podcast. So it was just like, if I do it, nobody's gonna listen. You know how anxiety just
Oh yeah.
you get in your head about it. And I remember having a conversation with my therapist about it, and she's like, I think it would be an absolutely, great platform to share your stories, share about topics, and bring guests on there. And I've had some pretty notable guests on the podcast, and it's gone international. I mean, it's pretty crazy when you see how much of an impact that you can have when you're so passionate about something and you want to get the word out. And like you said, you started with friends, you started with people that you were comfortable with, and that's how mine started too. It started with friends, and that grew into authors, and that grew into therapists. I mean, I think the podcast between you and I, your podcast, my podcast, I think we're two men in a community, in a industry that doesn't have a lot of guys that speak up about it. And I think it speaks volumes on a lot of the things that we talk about. And I love your podcast, and I'm grateful to have been on it at some point as well.
Yeah, I'm grateful to have had you on as a guest. I think it also brings up this thought. Feelings are scary, right?
Yeah,
Emotions are scary, right? Because if you don't know how to properly process them, you run the risk of traumatizing yourself or being re-traumatized, right? Uh, and so being able to grasp that and take time. One of the things I learned when I started doing this, because I went balls to the wall right at first, like you've seen it. I don't know moderation, bro. Like at all. Moderation is not a word in my dictionary. I've
right.
taken it out, I've scratched it out and burned the page. I went balls to the wall. And then after a while, I was just like, God damn, I'm just so tired. And it wasn't like the people or the pace. It was when you
Our
do
mental
this,
energy.
oh, yeah, it's a lot of mental energy. You're giving your energy to other people,
Yeah,
and it's not being returned, especially if you're not a guest on somebody else's show, right? If you're
right.
just doing stuff for yourself and establishing yourself in this field, it's like, fuck, this is heavy. Especially when, like, I had this guest where he shared his story and it sounded a lot like mine, but he was in graphic detail, dude. And you could see me visually shaken up in that episode. And like afterwards, I literally, I turned StreamYard off. I didn't even download his stuff right away. I went and I cried because it was just so fucking heavy. And then that was the point that I realized, like, I need to pace myself. I need to moderate myself. I need to do self care, right? Because self care works when you're in recovery and taking care of yourself, but it also works in this.
Yeah.
And in a weird way, this has become a part of my recovery program.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, and I've said this many times before, but I'll continue to preach my belief in it too. A lot of people underestimate how much energy that this takes out of somebody. Like, I don't know if you remember or not when I took that 2 week hiatus, man. Like, it got to the point where I shared that uh shared that post about my last therapy session, not this one, but the one before that. That was
Yeah.
really big for me. What I tried moving forward from that post, dude, I felt like I was thrown out of a train, thrown off a bridge, and then landed in like a pit of flames. And that's how it felt, like physically and mentally for me. And I've never gotten to that point of just like trying to pour from a cup full of dust, essentially. And like you said, man, self care while you're healing, while you're in recovery is massive. And I feel like a lot of people take that self care for granted because, again, self care has become a buzzword. And like people are like, oh, I just spent 4 grand on a pair of shoes, self care. Okay, like that's great. You're buying yourself something, but like self-care means so much more than materialistic things. Like to me, self-care is walking out on the dock and watching the sun go down. Like that's self-care. That's recharging and that's healing for me. Self-care doesn't look the same for everybody, but I also feel like self-care is another one of those buzzwords that everybody likes to throw around. Not to say it's losing its meaning, but it's becoming one of those words that is used all too much of now we're going to have to start rephrasing it to something else. You know what I mean? And obviously, I don't think it'll get to that point, but I think you understand what I'm getting at with that.
Oh yeah, I hate going on social media and seeing people say, "Oh, I'm doing self-care, blah 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 blah." Blah." No, you're not. Like, let's be real. And you can be nice about it. I'm not gonna be, right? That's not some of those things that people are doing is not self-care, right? Like if you're going out to the mall and you're fucking walking around, um, oh, one second. And you're, you're walking around and you're saying, "Oh, I'm gonna go get this brand new outfit and all this." That shit's not self care. That's not self care, bro. Like self care is what you do to bring yourself to the center,
Yeah.
right? To literally take yourself from an elevated standpoint to completely peaceful, right? Um, shit. Self care looked like for me when I was angry as a motherfucker. Like this has been within the past few years after I started my recovery. If I was angry as a motherfucker, dude, I would meditate. It wouldn't matter if somebody was screaming at me. It wouldn't matter if somebody was talking to me. I would meditate. I would just zone them the fuck out. Just meditate because it's taken me from this heightened stance of of being so angry that I could break shit to, yeah, go ahead, you can yell at me, it's fine.
Right.
And that's what self-care is. Self-care is literally taking yourself from a heightened state of being to baseline level, right?
I've
So when
always kind of
people,
looked at self-care like, what are you doing for your soul?
yeah,
Not what are
that's
you doing
exactly,
for your being?
oh yeah, yeah, exactly. Self-care, and religion is a hot topic. Self-care could be, going to church. I know a lot of people that do that as self-care, right? But that also falls under the spiritual recovery portion. But it's technically classified as self-care. But like going to a goddamn mall, right? Going to the
Right.
mall. Now self-care can be in different stages too, right? So like if somebody if somebody's completely overwhelmed or completely depressed, self-care could be, hey, I got in the goddamn shower today. And I'm fucking proud of myself for it. I got up and I ate a meal today versus yesterday where I had a cracker, right? Or self-care could be like, hey, I turned on my favorite TV show. I might have only watched 10 minutes of it and then zoned out on TikTok or Facebook, but I still did it, right? And that's something to help take care of yourself. So yeah, when people say I went out and I got me a Gucci ass bag. No, man, no, that's not self care. That's just that, that's you getting what you want. That's you spoiling yourself.
I appreciate the comment you made about there's different stages of self-care. I think that's a comment I felt like needed to be really highlighted because I never thought of it that way in terms of the healing process, different stages of self-care. That's a good one. I actually like that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, because if you look at it, like if you have like for me, I'm diagnosed with massive depressive disorder, right? I'm not always depressed. I can tell you that. There was a time where I was, where like I couldn't see past my front door. I would be stuck on my couch, staring at a blank TV for hours, staring into the dark abyss, and just everything seemed to overwhelm me,
Right.
right? And so, like the smallest thing, like brushing my teeth, would be a victory for me. That was self care, you know, being able to go outside, even if it was me going outside to walk to the fucking mailbox to get my mail, that was a victory. Whereas now, I'm not depressed and I haven't had depression in months, right? And that's great. I'm happy, but self care takes on a different role at that point, right? So for me, self care, like I love doing the cemetery walks. That's huge self care for me. Even if I'm put them on TikTok, whatever. I find that to be self care because, like, one, I'm out and in the sun. Vitamin D is one of the best things to help cure depression. Um, Two, I'm out in nature, so I'm able to walk around, smell the roses, all that other stuff, and I'm learning, right? So even if I just see a name or a death date, like that's a name and a death date that's going to stick with me. And so I mean, you know, there are different levels of self care, and there's different, and that depends on the phase of your life that you're in.
Right. Um, so since we've kind of talked about the sobriety part of your journey, what has been your favorite part of your healing process since starting your sobriety?
My favorite part. Um, my aha moments. I call them aha moments because it's those moments where somebody has said something and it's been like this light bulb went on inside my head. Or I did something in my recovery that I've done a ton of times, and a light bulb went on inside my head and something made sense. Or when I was making amends to certain people, and I had this like, because one of the things in recovery, dude, is like you gotta make amends to people, right? You gotta admit that you were the problem, and how they take it is on them, right? But getting that out there. There's been people that I've made amends to, and I'm like, they are absolutely not gonna talk to me. I'm the biggest piece of shit. And they've been like, I don't need you did that. I'm like, fuck, you don't even remember? Well, that feels good. But I would say my biggest, to me, what I'm most proud of is December, because when I first started my recovery, I was sitting in the courtroom. And I know you've heard this before, but for everybody, sitting in a courtroom in an orange jumpsuit. Well, no, it was white. It was white, and I had my hands cuffed. And the judge looked at me and he was like, why is this time any different than any other time that you got try to get sober? I said, I've done it for other people. Now I have to do it for myself. And if I don't do it for myself, then I'm going to fail this. And so, every step that I've taken in my recovery has led to the next thing, right? And I hate calling them steps, because it it's not linear, right? Like, I'm not doing this to get to the next step, but it's like every stepping stone that I took to get me to where I am now, all started there. And December happened, and I cannot tell you how many people that when I reached out to them or I talked to them, they said, do not drink. And for me, that wasn't even a thought in my mind. That wasn't even, I knew that that wasn't going to answer any of my problems like I thought before. That's because my thinking has changed.
Right.
So being able to stay sober through the one of the hardest things in my life, and actually the hardest thing in my recovery, helped me realize that, like, I went through that. I can fucking make it through anything, right? And then on top of that, because of that, I inspired other people that were suffering, right? So like I had friends or participants of the groups that I run reach out to me and say, hey man, like we've been having a hard time in our recovery. We've been having a hard time, you know, wanting to stay sober. And your story inspired me to want to stay sober, because you can make it through this. I can make it through something far less significant. And my response is like, my shit's not better than yours or worse than yours, right? But the reality is when we put our what we've worked on to use, it becomes inspirational to others, even if it's like the next right thing. Like, I know the next right thing for me is not to drink, because if I drink, one, I'm gonna be a dick. Two, I'm gonna throw away everything that I've worked my ass off for. Three, I'm not gonna have anything. Like, I wouldn't have my podcast. I wouldn't be able to. I mean, I could do my podcast, but I'd be lying to everybody, and I'd be lying to myself. And then, I couldn't have my groups that I run because I have to be sober doing those. So I had a lot to lose, but I had so much more to gain.
Yeah, I've always felt it was always interesting to watch people in their journey of sobriety, because like you said, you finally get to a point of inspiring others and pushing others to do the same as you in terms of healing. um, the one thing that I feel is like a giant black cloud in just today's society is social media when it comes to addicts, man. It's just like I remember making a TikTok. Somebody was like filming a junkie like ordering ice cream in an abandoned house or something, and they're just like laughing their asses off at it. It's like, I understand not everybody's gonna look for help, And I totally get that because I have an addict. I had an addict for a mother for many years, and not everybody is going to seek out that help for themselves or want that help for that matter. And I just feel making fun of these people, or just making videos and getting laughs out of it, it doesn't do anything for anybody, man. Like, you can't say you stand for something and then do the complete opposite. And I feel like social media has given that power to so many people that I trust with my life. And it's just like, hey man, like, this shit isn't cool. Like, it's not funny. Like, we have this pass go arrest page uh on Facebook, and sometimes they'll post like a 18-year-old kid get arrested for like meth and shit. And people will be making fun of his haircut or making fun of all the craters in his face or something. It's like, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend to know this kid's story or pretend that I know what he's going through because I don't. I've never had an addiction problem. But I'm also a human being. I'm not gonna look at him like an addict. I'm gonna look at him as a human being going through a battle that he obviously needs help. And I've seen people go through programs so many times and it doesn't help them. And again, you got to put in that work, and not a lot of people are willing to do that. But with that being said, there's one thing anybody that listens to my podcast that supports the journey and everything that I'm trying to do my best to uplift every week or every podcast that I do. If you see somebody struggling with addiction, or if you're one of those that just for some whatever reason likes to make fun of addicts on social media, man, do better. And I know that's such like a very brief statement, man, but do better. Like, we're all in this together. And I understand some people may have had bad experiences with addicts, maybe have been robbed by addicts or whatever. But I watched a friend or not watched pass away, but I had a friend pass away a couple years ago to an overdose. And then all of a sudden you see remorse from all his friends because they shut him out and didn't want to deal with him anymore. And I know somebody might get upset listening to this podcast, me talking about that, but just seeing how people react when somebody finally passes away that is an addict is genuinely heartbreaking to me, because it's just like, you had all this time on earth with them, and while it was cut short, you didn't do anything to help them heal.
Yeah.
And
Oh, absolutely.
I'm not going to mention names. I'm not going to say who I'm talking about. But if you listen to this podcast and you're one of those people, it's a reality of the situation. Social media has turned people into pieces of shit,
Yeah.
to put it bluntly.
I used to be that person that would make fun of junkies, dude. Like,
I was too, 100%.
yeah,
100%. Not even going to lie to you.
and then it happened to me, right?
Right.
It
Never
happened
think
to me.
that something can't happen to you is one of the truest statements I've ever heard in my life.
I never realized I used to live in the realm of it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And I did, right? So like I always say, oh, that'll never happen to me. I'll never get DUI. Oh, fucking DUI, right? That'll never happen to me. I'll never go to jail. I've been to jail, right? I'm too kind to assault anybody. I had an assault charge, right? Like, so I lived in these realms of not yet. And it wasn't until those things happened and I hit rock bottom that I was like, fuck, man, like I cannot live my life this way, right? And you're absolutely right. Social media has turned people into animals when it comes to homeless, to addicts, alcoholics, and that's the biggest thing that I have a problem with is you see somebody struggling, and instead of going there and saying, hey man, like, are you okay? Do you need food? Do you need water? We've been so accustomed to whip out our phone and say, look at that piece of shit, blah, 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 make assumptions, right? And that irritates the dog shit out of me. And then secondly, I hold this sentiment to be really true. Don't glamorize somebody in their death, right?
Yeah.
I hate that. I absolutely hate that. I hate, and I did this for my best friend. I watched my best friend die in Afghanistan in 2012, right? And I vocalized that he was my best friend and I loved him and we had good times. But I can also say he was a piece of shit, right? Like he was not a good human being. He was the yin to my yang. I was a nice human being. He was a dickhead, right? But I'm able to vocalize that. And when people die around us or pass away, we tend to be like, oh, let's look at the best of them. Why? Why? When you were not able to look at the best of them when they were alive, why do it now?
Absolutely. 100%.
Right. So like if you have a best friend that you didn't know had a drug and alcohol problem or an alcohol problem, right? And then one day you see them and they're homeless and you're like, oh, fuck you, and then shoo them away, and then get in your fucking Lexus and drive home to your $500,000 house
Right.
that you're barely making rent on, right? And then they pass away of an OD or pass away because of fentanyl or suicide, right? And then you're like, oh my God, he was my best friend. Fuck you. Like, I'm gonna say that. Fuck you. You deserve to burn in hell as a human being, because you did nothing for that human being. All you do is shoo them away and show them that they were as useless as they fucking feel.
Right. And one of the quotes that I hold really close to my heart, and I'm sure it's been shared over a million times or whatever, but I don't want you here for me when I'm doing well if you weren't there for me in my worst time. I don't want your congratulations. I don't want your I'm happy for you shit. Like, if you can't love me for what I'm going through and what I'm enduring, I I don't want you making a post about me if I happen to pass away tomorrow and say, "Oh, well, he was such a great guy. I haven't talked to him in 6 months, but he was a great guy. I loved him." Love somebody now.
Yeah.
Be there for somebody now. And I'm not telling you to be at their side, attached to their hip every second of the day. But if you know somebody's going through a hard time and you give a fuck about that person, you're going to see to it that they get better. And I'm not telling you to sacrifice 24 hours of your day to make sure that they don't fuck up. They're gonna fuck up. We're all gonna fuck up.
Yeah.
It's part of the healing process. We're not perfect. We were never made to be perfect. But the fact that there are so many people quick to just cut somebody off while somebody's struggling and not help that fucking person drives me crazy. Like, communication, bro. Like, communication for me is the biggest thing. If you don't like me, if you have a problem with me, tell me what I can do to do better. Don't sit there and make a post about me and throw nightshade at me and fucking make me guess what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and I feel we should have that approach to other people as well, especially if somebody's dealing with addiction problems or somebody that's feeling suicidal, like especially suicide, man. Like, I take that shit so seriously, and every time I see a story about it, like 13-year-old kid the other day, basically left in care in a hospital and then neglected him. That when you're on suicide watch, they're supposed to check on you every 15 minutes.
Yeah.
They neglected this kid and he took his life because nobody's watching him. And shit like that. Like, the signs are there. You're just not looking hard enough. Especially addiction too. The signs are always there. You just if you care about somebody, you're gonna analyze everything about them. Like, oh, they're acting different today. Maybe I should ask them if they're okay, like you said.
Yeah. And that's why when any of my, well, specifically this ex, whenever she would call and say, oh, I just hope you're doing good. I don't want that. I don't want that
Right.
from you. Right. You didn't give a fuck about my feelings and emotions when you destroyed me. I don't want your sympathy now. You can fucking kick rocks, dude. Like, I don't care. And I still hold that. Right. And like somebody said to me, oh, how, do you wish the best for him? Like, no, absolutely not. No, because the manner in which things happen, right? And like, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I hope that she had, no, dude, I hope she gets what's coming to her. And that's karma, right? But that's a topic for another time.
Yeah.
Not something here now, but you're absolutely right, man. Like, suicide is crazy. And it's so easy for us to be like, oh, TikTok, Facebook, oh my God, what's the newest trend? What is the
Hashtag mental
flashiest?
health awareness week.
Yeah, but you literally You literally have a phone button, or you literally have this app called Siri that can, I hope she doesn't trigger. Okay. That that can tell you that you can say, hey, call this person.
Right.
Hey, text this person. It'll even pop up the text box. What do you want to text? But we're so and I'm guilty of that too, man. We're so consumed with social media and we don't see the real side of shit that is happening behind closed doors. And
Absolutely.
it's insane. It's insane.
So going into the next question I had for you, this is kind of like a broad question, and you don't have to like talk about talk about it if it's not something you're comfortable with. But what was the biggest struggle for you in terms of you healing? Like, what was the hardest part of, I guess, this journey of becoming who you are now?
Okay. So it wasn't the childhood trauma, which is crazy, right? I mean, periodically here and there things come around.
Right.
It was something that happened, and I referenced it earlier. It was something that happened um, in 2012. I lost my best friend. I watched him die in front of me. And to this day, I can still, everything about it, dude. Our movement into the area, the building that we, or the structure we walked into, the cloud from the IED, the smell of burning flesh, just all of it. I can remember it, right? And certain smells will remind me of that certain times, but like for 10 years, I couldn't let that go. Right. I had taken a picture of him and I put it on my wall when I got home. And so I seen it every day and I'm like, that is helping me heal. It wasn't. It wasn't. I was just looking at a picture of him, right? I seen a picture of him every day. I never talked about it. People say, "Hey, man, you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. I got this, right?" And then things started progressing so bad, and like I got to this point in my recovery where I looked at my counselor and he said, "Well, what do you want to talk about?" I said, "I want to talk about that day." And he was like, "Are you fucking sure you're ready to talk about it?" And I was like, "Yeah." And it was, and Chris, dude, it was so bad. Like I couldn't. There are certain songs I couldn't listen to. I couldn't listen to "So Far Away" by Vince Sevenfold without it tearing me up. I couldn't listen to a certain Slipknot song because it would fuck me up because that was the last song we listened to. I couldn't look at his picture. I'd packed it away when I moved to Alaska, and I didn't open the box up. And when I opened it up, it was like it happened right then and there, right? And like it just destroyed me every single time. If a memory of him popped up on Facebook, it fucked me up, dude. Absolutely destroy me. And so like I became a prisoner to this situation for 10 years. It's something I had no control over, right? Something I didn't do, I didn't have control over. And as natural as death is, that was completely unnatural. And so when I talked about what happened, it fucked me up, dude. Like I
Yeah.
cried, um, and I let it out. But what that did for me was it gave me that peace of mind that like I don't have to hold on to it anymore, right? Like I'm no longer a slave to this. I'm no longer a prisoner to this. And we can't say slave anymore, but I'm not a prisoner to this anymore. I don't have that those shackles around my wrist or my ankles, and I can walk away from it. Not forget it, but I don't have to let those feelings do to me every single time. Nah, I mean, there's hard times, dude. Like his death
Of
date
course.
is coming up at the end of the month. Um, you know, one of my best friends, coincidentally enough, didn't know how this happened. He ended up working for, doing a side job for that guy's wife. And she referenced my name and he's like, I didn't know you knew Sean. Right. So like small little things like that happen and it brings up the things, but it's not like it used to be, right? And that was the hardest thing for me was like getting over that and like the guilt and the shame of everything that I had done in my life as an adult to other people. right? Because it wasn't always physical, right? Like I didn't always beat somebody's ass, and I'm actually like pretty calm, pretty chill dude, and I don't like to fight. But I've fucked people out of money. I have I have made an ass out of myself in public and embarrassed people, right? I had sexual relations with people's wives when they were married, right? Like that guilt and that shame was the hardest thing to let go of because I was like, man, I was such a piece of shit. But then I have to remember, like, that's not who I am today, right? Like 10, 15 years ago, sure, that's who I was. But that's not who I am today. And that's not the values that I hold. That's not the morals that I hold. That's not the standard in which I hold myself to now. So instead of holding on to all that, let it go because it don't matter no more. Half the people don't associate with me anymore. And if they do, they've already forgotten that it even happened.
So essentially, when you were able to start talking about it, it was one of your earlier aha moments kind of
Yeah.
thing, where you
Yeah.
don't have to hold on to that pain and
Mhm.
healing's possible.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
for me, that was one of the biggest things for me as well, is I never thought I was going to get out of like any of the pits that I found myself in. And whether that was after my first attempt or whether that was getting screamed at for 3 hours or losing my brother, whoever it was. And I never thought any of it was possible. I always thought, well, this is how life is going to be. I'm going to wake up tomorrow, somebody else is going to pass away. Or I was very bitter for a long time, and that reflected in work because of not getting a promotion that I thought I deserved, and wrestling school not working out for me. Just so many things that I held on to that's just like, well, this is my life, and I'm going to constantly disappoint my parents who, for some reason, not some reason, it was because I tried chasing their validation that I knew I was never going to get.
Mhm.
I did wrestling school because I was passionate about it, but I also wanted to hear the words, "I'm proud of you" from my dad. Never got that. Still have never got that. I don't want it.
Yeah.
And when I got it from my mom, it wasn't genuine. It was her trying to keep control over everything that she was destroying. So when I finally started therapy in 2018, and I had that early aha moment, the very last session I had with her before I came back down to Florida was the first two sessions that I had with her. I couldn't look her in the face. I was in tears both sessions. I couldn't look at her directly in the face, nothing. And when we got to our last session before I left, um, I realized that, wow, all this is possible not only because I made it possible, but I was able to see through all the things that I was told were normal, and all that trauma and all that shit I didn't have to hang on to anymore.
Yeah.
And that's reflected in my therapy sessions today. I mean, shit, it's getting me to talk about shit that I never thought I would ever come out with. Um,
Mhm.
I can only imagine. Well, yeah, I can only imagine uh, how hard that was for you, just starting that journey and trying to heal from such a impactful death in your life. And just
Yeah.
my hat's off to you, man. Like that's something I could never imagine going through. And I've said it before, and I'll say it time and time again. Thank you for your service and what you've been able to do with your podcast and stuff, man. Because, like I said, I look up to you with a lot of that stuff, and I think the world of you as a human being. So, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging, man. Like, uh, yeah, I couldn't do any of this without my first stepping stones. I would say that one of the other things that was like really hard for me, and I just thought of this, and it really didn't happen until very recently, was loving myself, right? Because I had all these thoughts about myself in my head, right? And even when I would share my story with people, I would say, "Oh, they're just going to see me how I see myself, right? This just piece of shit." And I labeled myself as that, and I held that. And then when everything happened, I felt like I was incapable of being loved, and I felt like I didn't deserve love because of everything that happened. And then, you know, I met my current girlfriend and her and I started to talk, and like I realized like quickly, like, dude, I am capable of love. And just I have to learn to love myself. And I had learning to navigate that um was really hard. One of my the counselor I just got done sessions with, she looked at me and said, "Do you know what love is?" That's the hardest question I've ever been asked in my life because I can't quantify love. I don't know what love is. I know what it feels like, but I don't know what it is, right? Um, I've always been told, you know, love is like a fairy tale, right? It's like Disney, like a Disney prince and princess. They fall in love and happily ever after, but it's never happily ever after. It's never been happily ever after. And as far as I knew what love was pain, right? Love from my parents came in the form of them saying, "I'm doing this because I love you," right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I hate that fucking saying, Chris. I hate it with a passion.
Me too. Heard that my
And
whole life too.
yeah, you know, and then I, you know, I thought that, you know, and then I was asked, how do you give your love out? And I'm like, what? There's a lot of like digging I had to do in myself to realize like one, I'm capable of being loved and I deserve to be loved, but also I can love myself, right? Like it's okay. There's that fine line of between loving yourself and being egotistical, right? And it's okay to love myself without being egotistical. And it's not okay to be egotistical if I love myself. So there's been a lot of that, but that also comes in self-care, right? And that comes in the form of it's gonna sound crazy as shit, but it works walking in front of the mirror and looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, what do I love about myself?
Funny enough, I was actually going to say that. I was going to say it all starts with the person in the mirror.
Yeah.
And that's something for the longest time that I struggle with too, because I'll be 100% honest with you. I still don't really know what love is. I don't know what it feels like. I don't know what it looks like because I was shown a roadmap of bullshit.
Mm.
I was told by my parents, "Oh, I'm doing this because I love you," or after I would get done having something broken over my head, "I'm doing this because I love you." Like whatever it was. Like I heard that phrase so many times throughout my life that I'm so numb to the phrase "I love you" that when I finally started therapy and doing all the exercises that she's taught me, I've been able to actually say I love you to myself and actually mean it. And
Yeah.
then be able to give the love that I have in my heart to other people and in the form of this podcast, in the form of those posts that I make in the group, whatever it is. And so many people I feel like struggle with self-love, man, because I feel like they sabotage so many other lives because they don't love themselves.
Yeah. We can, it's so easy for us as human beings to point out what we do not like about ourselves. And it's harder for us to be like, I love myself for X, Y, and Z, right? And that was one of the things that I was asked was, what do you not love about yourself? I named off a litany of things, dude. None of them were my character. None of them had to do with my morals or my ethic. They were all my physical appearance, right? Oh, I don't like the fact that I'm 5'5" on a good day because I'm short. People don't like short people, right? I don't like the fact that I'm balding because I'm looking like my dad. I hated it. Uh, this crooked ass pinky. I don't like. It was all physical things, dude. It had zero to do with who I am at the core of my person. And when I was able to see past that and see like it's all fucking this, not this, that's when I was able to say, all right, man, like you are a good fucking human being. You're not a piece of shit. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
hard.
it's definitely definitely an important message to share is just love yourself, man, because we underestimate the power of self-love and positive self-talk. And I know I'm guilty of negative self-talk, but that comes with its own struggles.
Yeah,
Um,
bro. I know I'm a sexy motherfucker now. I'm
Jesus,
just a sexy Sean. Sexy Sean. I
you
know,
make your
bro.
ankle hurt.
Yeah, I'm gonna make the ankle
Um,
hurt.
what's So one question I wanted to ask you was, what's the biggest stigma that you yourself has faced as a man, or as somebody who has been on the journey of healing in the form of sobriety?
Well, there's a few of them. The first one would have to be that I'm a man. I can't talk about my feelings. I mean, obviously, we hit that one on the head. The second one is something I learned in the army, and I learned to break it really quick. Was if it's broke, get it fixed. But if you get it fixed, you're a bitch. And that came in the form of me tearing my meniscus in 2014 and going in for surgery in 2015. And so, yeah, I couldn't walk, dude. I couldn't walk up steps. I had a platoon sergeant, so he's in charge of like everybody. He's the second non-commissioned officer in charge. He literally looked at me. He's like, "You're a bitch because you can't run, you can't walk." And I'm like, "Dude, but here's my MRIs that show that like my meniscus is torn in half." And he's like, "Yeah, well, I'm still doing this job with a torn shoulder." I'm like, "And that's your problem. That is on you. I didn't make the decision for you not to go get surgery. I need to get surgery to be whole, or to be as whole as I can be." And the last one is that, and I've heard this a lot, that my way is the right way. There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat in recovery. 1,000, right? AA is one of the grassroots programs. NA is one of the grassroots programs of recovery, but it's not the only way to recovery. And so for me, I had to break away from that stigma that AA is the only way. There's a few, I have, I had some biases when it came to recovery, and that was hard. Everybody has biases. If you say you don't have a bias, you're wrong. And that's just the honest God truth. For me, one of my biases was MAT, medication assisted treatment, right? Where people are taking Suboxone or methadone to get clean and sober. And that came because when I was in jail, I seen people abusing it, right? So cellmates would get Suboxone because they were heroin addicts, and then they would mix it with water and drop it in their eye. And I'm like, these motherfuckers are getting high, right? They're not using it for what it's worth. So when I got out and I heard people saying, "Oh, I'm on Suboxone," that was the first thought that came to my mind. It was like, you are not sober. And then one of my good buddies, I hadn't talked to him in a while, and I called him, and he started sharing his story with me and said, "I'm on Suboxone." I was like, "Man, you're not sober." He's like, No. He's like, "I've been waiting on this conversation for a while." And this is actually last year. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "This is what my dosage was. This is what I'm taking now." And it was significantly decreased. And he was like, "I take it as prescribed. It's prescribed by my doctor." And that was like another aha moment that I had was, holy shit, people do use this, and it is working for them to stay sober. And the more that I heard from people that were close to me that I knew, they came out and were like, "Hey, I'm using Suboxone. I'm using methadone. I'm using, Vivitrol, the Vivitrol shot to stay sober." And I'm like, well, fuck. Okay. As long as you're doing it as prescribed, that's all that matters.
It's interesting. The my way is right, and there's only one way to heal thing, because one thing that the crisis hotline taught me was, the key differences on the text line and the actual call line. And some of the conversations that I've had in there, without being specific, of course, um, was that just some people are more comfortable texting out things than they are talking about it. And again, goes back to healing. Like, some people just do better at writing it out than they do saying it face to face. And one of the hardest things for me was being a very face to face person. And a lot of people, most of the people I talk with are face to face, but then there's that little small percentage of the people I know that are strictly text messages. I'm like, "Hey, can I just call you? Like, I don't want to text all this out. Like, I hate that shit."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, well, I don't really do good at phone conversations." And for me, it was, one of those things where it's just like I didn't understand. I'm like, "Wait, how do you not know how can you not talk face to face? How can you not use your voice?" Like, I'm a little confused. And just like some people, heal different ways. Some people communicate different ways, and I that was one of the biggest struggles for me. Being I used to be really introverted, and now it's kind of like branched out into extrovert ish. The pandemic was the hardest thing in the world for me. I don't want to say it like my struggle was harder than anybody else. So if anybody listening, I'm not trying to downplay your struggles. I'm just saying like it was really hard for me during the pandemic because I'm a very social person, not being able to see people or people being scared to leave their house and not wanting to hang out because of COVID and everything. And that, healing different ways, communicating different ways was just something that I had to learn for myself because that experience that I had with my therapist that I shared on the panel of,
Mhm.
her throwing medicine at my face like immediately. And the first thought I get when I think of medicine is like, I don't want it to change my being. I don't want to have to rely on medicine. And it works for somebody. Some people need that, absolutely.
Yeah.
And for me, I just don't want to have to rely on a substance or a pills or anything just to feel right. You know what I mean? Like if I could talk about what I'm going through and me being a social person, talking about shit helps me heal. And the point of all this is what I'm trying to say is healing and communicating doesn't look the same for everybody. So that's something I didn't realize that people that were healing sobriety, I never realized that that was a stigma in that field was NA or AA or that's it. Like there's no other way. But
Yeah.
that's crazy you had to even experience that.
There's like 19 different pathways to recovery.
Right.
A lot of people don't realize that there's 19 prescribed and they're growing. There's more coming up with the pipeline. Um, but yeah, that's insane. Do you know why people like opt to text versus call? I have an idea.
So my thing with the text line is either they're in the same home as that person who is, possibly abusing them or possibly talking to them this way, or they just don't know how to vocalize it properly. Because I noticed for during the 3 years of the pandemic, something that I struggled with was talking because I didn't do it for so long, and like I would like trip over my words. Like I felt like I was in the first grade again, like trying to form a sentence. And I know some people might chuckle at that, but like I was very self conscious about it for for a while. Like people might not get that from me because I talk so much, but like I trip over so many words because of anxiety. Like over the pandemic, my anxiety like skyrocketed. And then like having conversations with people is so foreign to me sometimes, like person to person, that it's so weird. Like I don't think it would be uncomfortable if I were to have a person to person type therapy with Jess, but like she made virtual therapy like I adjusted to it like so fluently because of her. But like I struggled with like socializing after the pandemic when everything started opening up again because like that anxiety of I haven't talked to somebody or had a conversation with an actual human being in so long that I just felt like I was going crazy. And I know that's kind of like a red flag word, but like I felt like I was going crazy.
Yeah. So the one thing that I noticed, and I've talked about this with a few people, is that is texting or writing things out. It gives the person the opportunity to think and articulate what they want to say, right? And I found that if I write, if it's coming from the heart, right? If it's coming from the heart for me, I'd much rather write it out and have you read it or me read it to you versus saying it just
Right.
off the top of my head, right? Because like off the top of my head, I'm gonna sound like a dumbass. If I'm able to write it out or I'm able to type it out, it comes from the heart and I'm able to think about what I was gonna say. But yeah, man. So like pandemic was actually when I started my recovery. I was just starting my recovery, pandemic hit, boom. And for me, I to be completely honest, up to that point, I hated people, dude. I hated being around people. And that's the veteran thing, I guess. I hated being around people. I hated socializing. So when the pandemic happened, I was like, I can be at home.
Right.
I can I can be at home and play video games and watch movies and sleep and eat all the goddamn food I want. Yeah. I have to call into a UA line to see if I have to go pee. Yeah, let's fucking do it.
Right.
I can put my phone on silent and go through this class. Yeah, let's do it. So it was like super comfortable for me. And it wasn't only until, within this past year that like socializing became a thing for me and like I enjoy it. I'm not all the time. Okay, socializing within reason. Okay, like I'm not out here a social butterfly, right? Like I'm not that. I'm a pretty little butterfly, but like I'll definitely be like, yeah, I want to go out and like go to dinner and be around people. Or no, dude, I'm cool with like just sitting here and watching a movie.
Yeah, man. Like we had a routine every Thursday that we were going to Buffalo Wild Wings. And then I remember when they closed down, WrestleMania was taken away from me. Like so many social things for me were taken away. And like again, I know it wasn't just me. So anybody who gets upset at those comments, I apologize. But when those things were taken away from me, it fucking destroyed me. Like as a person, like my personality was just all over the fucking place. I didn't know how to have conversations with people anymore. We started working from home, like fucking chaos,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, madness.
But definitely don't want to. I don't want to make this podcast about me. So, um,
But it's your experience, man, and that's what
yeah,
matters, dude. Everybody's experiences are different.
this is a good one I wrote down for you. What's the most important lesson you were forced to learn?
Mm. That it's not about me, right? And that comes in all phases of my recovery. It's not about me. If I'm if I was in a class and the counselor, harped on me or would bring me up to the front to have me read something, I used to take it very personal, right? I'd be like, out of 50 fucking people in this whole goddamn room, you
Right,
chose me,
right,
right? You got it out for me. And I held that kind of, I guess you'd call it victim mentality. Um, but then I had to learn like it's not about me. It wasn't ever me. It was for the betterment of everybody around me because our experiences, sharing our experiences, changes the perspective, right? One person could need to hear what you had to say out of 50 fucking people, and you provided that message to them. Times when my ex would be upset, and it had nothing to do with me, but it was projected at me. I had to look at that and be like, this is not about me. As much as I want it to be about me, as much as I want her to like scream and yell at me so I can feel justified in being angry, it's not about me, right? Um, the podcast, it's part of me, but it's not about me, right?
right.
And you hit it on the head. It's not about me, right? It's about getting other people's stories out there. So this whole time that's what I had to force to be learned was that and that at the very beginning I had to do this class called moral reclination therapy, and I've mentioned this before, but the first step for any program is the hardest, dude. And the first step was I had to admit that I had a bag of secrets. I had to share those secrets out in the open, and I was like, fuck, this sucks, right? But that was like that was freeing. And so like I had to learn that like in order to get better, I'm gonna have to go through some pain. And not that pain that I learned that was like, I'm doing this because I love you. It's I have to cause myself some pain in order to get better.
Right. It's definitely it's not about me thing. Definitely feels one of the most uh, substantial lessons I definitely had to learn in my healing process too. Because while the healing itself is, repairing the bruises and learning to honor my inner child and stuff, it's about the example you could set for other people in your journey of healing. Like, yeah, you're healing yourself, but how many people are you inspiring on your way up? How many people are you uplifting on your way up?
Yeah.
And definitely being able to recognize that it's not about you, it's not about me, is something so many people don't understand.
I've had people that have just touted my praises because of the groups that I run, the topics that I come up with, the podcast, and I have to continuously remind them. And I say this, I'm like, dude, it's not about me, right? Like I am just the gateway to get people to where they need to be. I'm not gonna say I'm the voice for the voiceless because that's you. I am that person that helps facilitate the change. I'm that person that helps get people's stories out there. It's not me, it's them. I'm not
You
doing
know,
any of the work.
one of the one of the heaviest things that my therapist said to me, and when she said it to me, I was in tears because like I didn't understand it at first, but when she said it, like I broke down, like it completely shattered me. But she said, "You're that lighthouse on the island. You're guiding people through the waters. You're that person that you didn't have growing up for everybody else." And again, it goes back to that phrase. It's not about you, kind of thing. And me healing has been about sharing my story. Yes, like my story is my own, my experiences are my own, but
Yeah.
they're not just because I want attention. They're not because I want sympathy or anything like that. Like I want everybody to know that you're not alone in
Yeah.
any of this. Like while you may feel like that, and I felt like that probably my entire life that I was alone. And I think this podcast, your podcast, and others are a shining example of you don't have to do this shit alone. And
Yeah.
it's a hard fucking world we're in, man. Like
Yeah.
trials and tribulations and bullshit that we have to endure every single day, man. You're not alone. And I cannot struggle that phrase enough. You're not alone
Mhm.
because eh, it's a hard life, man. We're all going through it. We're all in different levels. Some of us are a little more healed up than others. Some of us are just starting to heal. There is no timeline on how long you should heal for. There is no timeline on grief, and that's something that needs to definitely be said. Um, and it's not about us. It's about you guys. It's about our supporters. It's about anybody listening that can relate with your story or my own.
Yeah.
It's all those topics that so many people were so afraid to talk about. Like I didn't even know what the word gaslighting meant like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's used almost every other day, like we talked about on the panel.
Mhm.
Um,
I hate that
and
word.
and it's just things like that, man. Just going through this journey and healing the way that we have. Um, it's a great lesson, and
Yeah.
glad that you articulated. I can't even say that word right. Um, for all the listeners because it's definitely a really important lesson.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I had a question on there written down, but like I kind of want to give you time to work on it a little bit more before we actually talk about it with your
Okay.
book.
Okay.
Um, I know it's the ideas out there, and I'm not sure like what release date you had or anything. So
Oh, you can ask it. It's fine.
yeah. Um, so I guess what is your book going to be about, and do you have a set release date?
All right, so my book it's an autobiography about my life. I mean, obviously that's what an autobiography is. But it's pretty much gonna entail, I haven't decided if I want to do it in 2 or 3 parts or just one, like one big book, because my life is fucking crazy. Um, it's got good and bad things. The first chapter, I talk about growing up with, for my first memory, loving wrestling. And then it goes into traumatic experiences and it's very vivid in detail. Um, and I just, for me, I want this to be like a lesson for people that you can live a shitty, not okay, that's terrible. You can have a terrible series of events happen to you your whole life, but that doesn't mean that there's not something better on the back end, right? So that's what a book is about. Now, I haven't come up with the title yet. I'm working on figuring that out. The title that I had before I deleted the file and then started again was called the turbulent trials of my life. And that was before I got into recovery. And I was like, I don't want this to be a victim book. I want this to be a
Right.
triumph, right? I want this to be something triumphant. I want to get it done within the next 2 and 3 years. I want to get it sent out to publishers to see who the fuck will pick it up, and hopefully release date in 4 years.
Yeah, man. When that book comes out, I'm definitely grabbing a copy. So looking forward to that, man. So the last question I have for you on the podcast, while we wrap it up, is you can change one thing in the mental health community, what would it be?
Mm. Empathy and the lack thereof. I think that there's a majority of people that have empathy toward people in their circumstances, but I think on the clinical side, there's a huge lack of empathy, right? Like peer to peer. So you to me, we have an abundance of empathy, right? You go on social media, sometimes there's an abundance of empathy. Somebody's going through something, there's an outpouring of love. But you get to the clinical side of things, it's very hard to find empathy. You know, somebody that line between sympathy and empathy is blurred, right? Or just a complete lack of empathy and a lack of understanding and a lack of listening, active listening. It's a huge lack of all that. I would change that. I would say scratch. You know, there has to be some form of a test where you sit in front of somebody that's receiving services and you're evaluated on how you handle that person or how you work with that person. And then moving forward, groups, how you can handle a group, right? Because there's a written test to be a counselor, but they don't have a practical exercise. You don't know how to handle things outside of a collegiate setting or a setting of academia. You don't know what it's like to get out into the real world and see people with real life problems and how to handle them. And that's what I would change.
Yeah, I definitely think between that and just like being able to identify when the passion for mental health is no longer there with certain counselors, therapists, because there's a lot of them out there, man. Like I feel like you or I shouldn't have to go through 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different therapists before we find the right one. And there's nothing wrong with shopping around. You know, there's nothing. You know, we do that with cars. We do that with clothes. You know, whatever. We shouldn't have to do that when it comes to our mental health. You know, same with doctors, like regular like physicians, whatever. How we communicate with doctors is, I think, should be one of the most important things. Like you said, like there should be an evaluation to see if you match up with this person. Time and money should not be wasted between both parties and say, you know, 3 weeks in, this therapist isn't writing anything down. This therapist isn't giving me anything that I can use. Like I've experienced that the bad therapist myself, and it took somebody from NAMI to tell me what to ask those therapists. And through almost 3 years later, I have Jess, you know, and I feel like everybody that I know who is in therapy or counseling of any sort has had to go through the ringer of therapists or has had nothing but bad experiences with therapists. And I every time somebody has gone to me for a resource for therapists, I'm like, you know, I use this site, I filtered out the stuff that I want to talk about. I feel more comfortable talking to a female about the things that I struggle with just because there's that like I always feel like there's that silent judgment between guys if they were my therapist. So no guy therapist for me. And I always say, you know, ask questions. You know, your first session, ask you know, what kind of therapy that they cover, you know, how much is one session going to cost, you know, and I know money is a big thing for a lot of therapists, and it shouldn't be. I understand they're providing a service and a very important one. But what I'm saying is there are a lot of therapists out there who are just in it
Yeah.
for the money and not for giving a shit about people. And I've experienced one of those people, unfortunately, and I know others that have done the same. I just feel like there should be, if you notice passion starting to run out in the therapist, like if they're working for somebody's practice or whatever, I just genuinely feel like there should be like an evaluation, like, hey, how are you feeling about this field? Like, is it still for you? Like maybe like every couple of years or something. I don't know. Um, but that's just my thought on that, man.
Yeah, blah, blah. Caregiver fatigue is a real thing, and
Yeah,
that's something that has to be monitored.
absolutely. So at the end of every podcast, I like to read a quote to our listeners, whether it's from you or myself. We'll let you go first. Read the quote that you had, and then I'll read mine.
All right, so mine comes from Henry Ford. I love this. I've seen this, and I believe wholeheartedly in it. And it says, "Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right."
Volumes, bro,
Yes,
and like the shortest amount of words, volumes.
yes, absolutely.
Um, so I have a quote from Russell Wilson, um, and it goes, "If we start being honest about our pain, our anger, and our shortcomings, instead of pretending they don't exist, then maybe we'll leave the world a better place than we found it."
100.
Generational cycle. That I think that touches heavily on the cycle conversation we had.
Absolutely.
Sean, I want to thank you so much again for coming on the podcast and sharing a piece of you with our listeners. Um, can't wait to hear more about your book. So far, what you've sent me, powerful shit, man. Can't wait to see more. And thank you again so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, bro. I appreciate it, and I enjoyed this time.
Yeah, man. And for all my listeners, thank you again for your support. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I should have that NAMI panel out here soon. Thank you again for your support. And as always, be well, but most importantly, be gentle with yourselves. Until next time, take care, guys.